think the ERP has done well, but
Singapore is a country.
Getting a car is a social
thing.
status.
When it comes to owning a car in Singapore, you shouldn't even
Nowadays,
consider it. It's not an
it's
option.
impossible to be even out of your parents' house. I think your question should be what's wrong with Singaporeans.
Good evening and welcome to Talkabout. Today we're going to touch on transportation. Does transportation in Singapore need fixing in any way? With me in the studio, I have four guests. I have Mr. Winston Cheng, I have Miss Sharon Pang, Miss Sharon Ma, Mr. Tony Chow, and Mr. Gulati.
Yeah.
Okay, Anuj Gulati. I'll leave the guests to introduce themselves, and I hope that they will tell us more about themselves rather than less. Winston?
Hi, I'm 68 and at the moment gracefully retired. I started off as a disc jockey years ago and later went into business and even into projects and things like that.
And that was what I was afraid of. He has opened a nightclub, he's into big business, he was dealing with some of the big MNCs that came into Singapore. Many of them were successful, and he's being, I don't know, maybe he did something wrong in the past, that's why he's being so cautious. We'll move on to Sharon.
Hi, I'm Sharon. I'm currently a consultant with a training and development firm. I deal with quite a lot of core skills training, so things like emotional intelligence, building high performance teams. My background is actually in Masters in Chemical Engineering, so there's the irony there. But I think my interests are quite diverse. So in my previous jobs, I was also involved in non-profit creative arts work. I was coaching quite a few music bands in performance and taking them on the road for performing in campuses. So yeah, that's my background.
As a band person or as a promoter?
I was doing both. I was the front man of one band and I was a manager of another.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. What band?
The band that I was fronting is actually just me and my husband. We're an acoustic band. And the other band is a youth band that plays pop,
Okay.
high pop as well. Yeah, so.
All right. Okay.
Wow.
And we have Tony Chow.
Hi, I'm Tony Chow. I'm an independent media consultant. I've been in the media sector for about 18 years. Primarily in the creative sector, so I produce TV programs. And I graduated with a degree in political science from the local university. And I'm very passionate about creating a creative sector in Singapore. So primarily that's pretty much what I have done so far.
Tony was also the president of the Association of Independent Producers, and I think that he had a lot to do with the growth of the production industry in Singapore for some years.
My
And
name
we
is
have a
Anuj,
filmmaker, yes.
independent filmmaker based in Singapore. Did my film schooling at NYU Tisch School of Arts in Singapore itself, and I've actually been in Singapore for about 10 years. So I would bring, before that I was in India, so I would bring a different approach to the topic that we have at hand today, which is transportation in Singapore, because I come from India where it is at another extreme level. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys think about the transportation here and approaching that.
And perhaps share with us what you get in India as well.
Yes.
Okay, I think we'll start with the most reticent of us all, Winston. He has usually very little to say. Winston, maybe you can kick it off.
Singapore, well, I suppose there are very little traffic jams for the number of cars on the road, so that I think the ERP has done well, but it has cost a lot, more than an arm and a leg to own a car. So as far as the road transport for cars, I'm quite happy with it because I've seen massive jams elsewhere,
That's true.
right?
Yeah, in other countries, what I've experienced is it's almost like the main roads are car parks. They're not actual roads because everybody is just congested. So I think in terms of I think trying to manage the congestion, there it is. But I agree with Winston in terms of like the cost. to own and to maintain is very high in comparison. You just need to list the price and share it with somebody who's like visiting here, and you know, the eyeballs just fall out because they're so shocked at how expensive it is.
But is that part of the cost we have to pay to get relatively traffic-free roads?
I suppose in some ways, it's either you have the chicken or the egg. You can have both at one time. Because if you make it cheap, everybody will have 2 cars, 3 cars. You see, like in Jakarta, they have so many cars in one house,
So you're quite willing to accept that the cost of transportation, cost of owning a car is acceptable for what we have?
Yes.
I can't disagree because I think cost itself, somewhat to me, a lot of people who really needs a car may not be able to afford to get
Yes.
one, and then the people who are richer gets the car. So
Yes.
that is that. What is it really? A fair thing to do? I mean, I'm a public transport person because I take the MRT, I take the buses and all that every day. I don't drive. So my observation has been that lately, especially the last couple of years, I think even the tube or the MRT has been getting very crowded. And there's a lot of discomfort, I mean, I've been to Tokyo, I've been to Hong Kong, and I can see how the rush hours and how packed the train could be. But I think in Singapore it's becoming a social problem with so crowded, and also I do realize that the somewhat, well, maybe it's getting better, but the efficiency of the system in terms of frequencies, whereas in a very, very huge country like Tokyo, you got excellent network, and I do see that the efficiency is there even with such a high number of a volume of people. But here, you got the peak hour, but when you look at the actual frequency of the MRT, it's actually quite difficult. I mean, it takes a long while to get on the train, sometime, and I do feel beside crowded. Like what you all say, Winston and Sharon, about costs in terms of owning and using. I think Singapore is probably one of the unique country that is most expensive in owning and also very expensive in maintaining or using. Like Australia, you get a car cheap, but it's very expensive to use it because parking, and everything else are expensive. But here it's both. So back to my point, I think it's somewhat actually penalize those who really needs a car.
But wait a minute, the cost of moving around in our taxis, moving around on the MRT and buses is relatively low, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
Compared to countries that have a comparable system of public transportation.
But it's not a very transparent system because there are a lot of hidden charges. By the time you add on, I think it depends where you're coming from. With the morning charges, I mean, I take the cab, but it's getting more unaffordable because...
This is more in relation to the cabs, but I think
Yeah.
in a way the public transport, it
It's
is
still
relatively
quite-
cheaper compared
still
to some
cheaper.
of the other countries.
Yeah.
But I agree with you, in terms of taxis, the embedded costs, depending on the time and where you want to go, there's all these things that kind of factor in that you might not have taken into account before. That
I would like
you
to
know-
argue against that because the cost of owning a cab, including the COE, as of 2013, like a taxi owner will pay about $95,000 per cab just to drive the taxi on the road. And compared to other countries, the taxi fares here still are, including the amount that the guy is spending in it to get the taxi on the road, is actually very doable. I mean, if you compare it to Sydney or even like the United States, if you go to LA, like taxis are like unaffordable. So I think the taxis are still doing a pretty good job in Singapore compared to
Getting a cab
fares.
is difficult. I mean, maybe the cost is not so high, but then if you want to get a cab, I mean, most time you can't get one. I mean, that's a frequent
Is
complaint.
it
that
easier to
people
get a
have.
cab in New York, in London,
It was very easy to get a cab in Bangkok or Hong Kong. There's no issue with that.
and it doesn't move?
Yeah.
That's a trade-off. You get the cab, but do you get anywhere in the end?
But here is, I mean, we know the problem because here the structure, the renter is high per day, so you have to have 2 shifts, right? You can't drive a whole 24 hours, so you do the two shift, and then most of the cases because of the extra charges like the 50% or 35%, so cabs sometimes hide themselves somewhere in order that they can wait till that midnight. I mean, before now, I think 11:30 onwards is already they started the charges, or even sometime earlier, like between 6:30 or 5:30 to 9:30. Then it's just so confusing, the charges, right? But basically, the cab will, because of getting higher income, they find all ways so that some area you just can't get a cab. I think we experience it. I experience it. It's very difficult to get cab. You're very worried that you just can't find one when you need one.
Okay, now we're warming up. We've had some preliminary discussion. After the break, we want to go deeper into looking at the MRT in particular. I think Winston has lots of things to say. We also want to look at our taxi men. How efficient are they, and what kind of service we get from them. Okay, thank you. Welcome back. Now we want to drill in further on these two particular topics, taxi men and the MRT, who recently has been making quite a bit of news. I think that reticent Winston has got something to say.
Well, my experience is when they opened the new Circle Line, I went to take a look. I was shocked. There were only 3 carriages. And the Circle Line served a lot of new estates that haven't been developed. And 3 carriages is almost the size of an LRT, the sub-service. And now, if you go there during rush peak hours, where they interchange, you will find that the inbound 3 carriages, the doors open, the people all rush out. The other side, the other train comes in, the people rush out. The people trying to go in, there's traffic jam. And how are you going to expand that? All the digging's been done, all the infrastructure's been done.
You're saying they cannot increase 3 carriages?
How? Unless you move in 3, then move in and move the train out of the platform, you can't.
You're saying the physical capacity of the existing Circle Line cannot take more than 3 carriages?
Because it was designed so. Unless they have.
So they increase the frequency?
Yes, but still, it's dangerous. They have already told us to increase faster speed, faster frequency may lead to increased risk. That's what the SMRT spokesperson has said, you see. This is the thing. So that's why I don't understand how did the experts come to the conclusion that we only need 3 carriages for a Circle Line. Circle Line means it goes round, joining many points, like in London, the Circle Line. But this Circle Line has only 3 carriages. How many people can it take at one time? But the thing is, the platform is so small. They open up, people come out, people trying to go in, and you have a look.
Okay, we'll put this question to the SMRT, and hopefully by our next program we'll get an official reply from them. Okay, but any comments on our MRT system?
I agree with Winston that it is that it's something that was looked over, and once a problem is created, you as the government will create more steps, more procedures to rectify it. For example, they have this new initiative for the next year, in which if you are taking the train from outside the central business district before 7:45 a.m., your ride is free, which is a great initiative. But I feel like it is something introduced to cover up for mistakes that have been made, as Winston just mentioned.
You don't think that the move was to actually encourage more people to take the MRT and then less people to use the roads?
I think it's to avoid the peak hour traffic
Yes.
in the MRT.
Yes.
And because if the peak hour traffic, for example, on the Circle Line would create the jam, as Winston was mentioning. But of course, there are other lines to look into which have always existed the way they have. And independent of the Circle Line existing or not, they were always very crowded at 9 a.m. or 8:30 a.m. In that regard, I think it's a great initiative to ask the people to travel an hour earlier. And
Okay, can we cast the net a little further? And you originally came from Bombay, although you're a PR now.
Yeah.
So, in India, do they have an MRT system in Bombay?
Well, it's not. I wouldn't say it's an underground system or as developed as Singapore. They do have a railway system for local transport.
Okay, that's for long distance, right?
Yeah, but it works through the city.
Okay.
So it's called the local.
And is it as efficient?
And not at all. I mean,
Okay.
if the peak hours in Singapore seem too crowded, if you try to take a local train, that's what it's called in Bombay, at 9 a.m., you would see people riding on the roofs,
Okay.
and it's completely unsafe. But there are people who have to traverse across the city to go to work at that time of the day, and they're like below lower middle class, and that's the
Okay.
only option they have.
Okay,
So-
we mustn't benchmark ourselves against the worst. I think that has been a habit that we have often adopted when we want to say how good we are. We look at the worst in the world and say, look at us and look at them. Okay, so let's not do that. But Sharon has been in England, and I think that their transportation system is well developed. How does it compare with Singapore's, their tube and our MRT?
I think that there are a few things that make the context a bit different, because when London's underground system was developed, it was developed actually kind of in tandem with the development of the city. When you look at Singapore, it's a bit different because the city, the CBD area and all those areas developed, and then later on, then we thought about the underground system. So in that sense, it didn't have that same kind of evolution as the underground system in London. The tube is a very well spread network, I will say that. And I think after 2012's Olympics, in terms of the wayfinding, in terms of how everything was connected, it's actually a lot better. In fact, I just came back from London last month. So it is a great system to work with, but they also face their own delays. Someone will
Breakdowns?
jump, breakdown. People will jump in front of the trains and there'll be a suicide, and then the whole Circle Line will shut down because there have been accidents and all that. So, I mean, London's tube system also has its fair shares of delays and inconveniences and all that. And
Compared to Singapore?
I would think so, because sometimes you can have one whole line that's completely paralyzed, and it's right in the center where there's Bond Street and all that, and no one can use that line. So they will jump in and there'll be replacement buses and all that, which is kind of like what the MRT system does here.
And is there a public hue and cry when that happens?
No, not really. I mean, most people kind of accept, oh, it's the tube again. It's that kind
So
of
you-
Resignation.
It's a resignation that it's like, oh, we'll just make do. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that the breakdowns are less frequent. Not at all. I think it's partly also, I guess, maybe as Singaporeans, we're so used to efficiencies, right? That the slightest inconvenience, and I mean, I take it that it is a inconvenience. But perhaps the volume of reaction need not be so violent.
Okay, let's compare ourselves against ourselves. Tony, a commuter, okay? Compare Singapore's MRT system today, its efficiency and how it serves us, with the MRT perhaps 3-4 years ago. Has it improved? Has it deteriorated?
I think my biggest problem with that is actually the crowd. But I mean, I agree that other countries probably the frequencies of breaking down is also as much, but nobody will report about it because it's so used to that. In Singapore, we will make a mountain out of a mole because I think we're too pampered people. So little problem we take a big hoo-ha about it, and then it didn't help with all this publicity and social media. They just went viral and got worse and twisted, and so forth. People start saying that it's inefficiency and they don't accept that, which I think in a way is no big deal. Life goes on. So I think the system is efficient in a way, but I do feel that there's just not cater to the masses in terms of the volume that we have today, which is why I think it is kind of like, if you put about 3 or 4 years ago, it's more comfortable to ride on the train than today.
Commuting was easier before?
It was easier, yeah.
Is it because of the numbers?
Numbers, and probably it's less complicated, and now of course I guess the city developed and we start building it after, and also the amount of people and the volume and the frequencies may not be catered to that kind of masses or volume of people, so the whole experience of the ride has been much less comforting than before. That's for sure. We can see that different. 3-4 years ago and now, definitely they're marked different in terms of comfort. It's not comfortable anymore. In fact, I'm a bit frightened to take the MRT these days.
Why?
Because I'm just like, I'm concerned that, once in the wrong hours, the frequencies are not there. I have to wait. Sometimes I have to wait for like 6-7 minutes for a train. I don't get that in places like Tokyo.
But 6-7 minutes is so amazingly short, you're spoiled.
No, not true. I mean, to me, 6-7 minutes is long. I
For a
expect
Singaporean who has been spoiled.
maybe, but I think I'm used to basically not accepting 6-7 minutes.
Okay, so you've been used to better in the past, and now because of
Well, the
increase-
other phenomenon that comes out actually is sometimes it's so crowded you can't even get on a train, and sometimes you've got to wait for 4 trains
Yeah.
before
Okay.
you can actually
Always
get on
noticed
board.
that.
Yeah.
So the waiting time is?
Yeah, so the waiting
Increase.
time will be longer.
Yeah.
For
so
4
if
trains?
you wait 4 trains, it could be anything between 10 to 15. Well, actually more, about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
if
some
you
people
really
get there
cannot
20 to
find-
30 minutes to
Yeah.
get on the train. So, I mean, it is a long wait. If you don't
Okay.
get to the first one and you have to wait for 4 or 5 next, although the frequency might be 3 minutes, 4 minutes, but still they add up. It's not so easy now.
Is this a design or a running mistake or the planning? I always go back
question.
to,
Yeah.
to
Okay.
the root question. We hire people based on their merits, on their meritocracy. They're supposed to be fantastic planners. That's why Singaporeans grumble, because we have been told we pay high. We pay them high, we expect high, we are always efficient, and we get to this hype already. So when things break down, we get very disappointed. So we start grumbling. He mentioned Tokyo, Korea. They come on time, those trains.
It's very efficient
In Korea, 16 trains.
Japan.
And when you have to walk, I tell you, people grumble when they walk in Outram Park, quite far. But in Korea, it's very efficient, and you walk for half a mile, or something like that. But it's efficient, you see. When you get there, you'll get in,
So you know what to expect, is
Yes,
that what you're saying?
yes.
So you
Right.
don't build up
Yeah.
high expectations and not
Right.
get it delivered.
Then
get
it comes back to the basic design when you first start. Did they cater? Did they cut costs? Did they not think of what will happen in the future? Like really, the Circle Line is going to be a big headache unless somehow they have managed to extend the platform without telling us.
Maybe have
How are you
some
gonna
reserve.
How are you gonna dig? How are you gonna extend it? Tough. Because excavation works. It will disrupt all kinds of things.
So your contention, as you raised earlier on, was that the Circle Line has underprovided,
Yes.
and that the current capacity for it to handle 3 trains is
Three carriages, yeah.
3 carriages is insufficient.
Yeah, already.
Okay, and whether there are any planned solutions to that. Okay,
Maybe ask them.
Yeah, we'll ask them that. Okay, anything else about the MRT?
Otherwise, I travel quite a bit, and otherwise, it's quite comfortable in that way. It's clean. It's the only thing. Rush
Actually,
hour,
on a
I
score of
avoid.
10, on a score of 10, with your experience overseas and in Singapore, how would you rate our MRT station? I'm going to go one by one. Winston,
About 6 or 7, not so bad.
that's not too bad.
Yeah.
I'll give it an
Sharon,
8.
oh, that's very good.
Yeah.
Tony,
Well, I give it a 6.
6.
Yeah.
8.5.
Anu, oh,
Yeah,
that's not bad.
Edge it over.
Okay, so that's an average of about 7. So actually, despite the grumbles and all that, we aren't doing very badly. Not doing too badly at all. Okay.
And the other point, as an elderly, those youngsters, they don't stand up for me.
How do you define elderly? 68 is not,
Those seats are reserved, and sometimes I have to tell the youngster, stand up for the other old lady to sit, because the elderly will not, because they have been brought up not to disturb the peace. So I had to tell them, please give the seat. We have lost this,
No, but I think to be fair to
Yeah.
young people, it's not all of them who
Yeah.
don't give up.
Most of them do.
Most
Quite
of
most
them
of
do.
Yeah.
not those who are sitting.
Some of them
in
don't.
those
But I feel sad that we have to
Yeah,
designate
you're right.
reserve seats.
Yes.
That's
No,
one of
and
my
the-
biggest concerns.
in
Why do we
China-
even have to go to a point
Yes.
telling people this has to be reserved
In
seats?
China, the bus conductor, "Oi, Oi, oi!
That's
Shout,
why-
you know, she
that's why-
shouts across, give the seat!
because of such
Is it right?
because of
Yeah.
such things happen, right? I'm subconsciously I avoid trying to even sit the
there.
next 1-2 seats from there
Yeah.
because I know the moment you get there, then you just have to get up all the time. So myself stand.
Yeah.
So I think it's a sad
That's-
thing for
Yeah,
Singapore.
sad.
isn't
That's
it?
another topic we need to talk about, the
Yes.
civic
Yes, of course.
consciousness of
Civic
our
consciousness of
people, of our young
Singaporeans, yeah.
people. Talking about civic consciousness, I think we'll visit that in another week, but in the meantime, I cannot let this pass. I have a story that I heard from a colleague of ours, SJ, on the bus. SJ, would you like to join us?
Thank you. Well, I got on the bus the other day and it was pretty full, and a whole lot of boys got on, age maybe 13, 14, and two people decided to leave the bus. Immediately, the boys dived for the seats, and I mean dived, all of them. Two of them succeeded, sat down, very pleased with themselves, and I looked at them and I said, "Guys, I am a hell of a lot older than you, out!" And they did. They looked absolutely terrified and shot to the end of the bus. And the other passengers around were absolutely fit to be tied with laughter. They could hardly stay in the seats. But none of them had actually thought about shooing these lads out of the seats. Anyway, they stayed out of my way.
Well done. Hi, we've been spending the early part of this program talking about public transportation, the MRT, the taxi drivers, the buses and all that. I think it's now time to put the spotlight on the private drivers, the people who drive on the roads, the cyclists on the roads, and perhaps even the non-drivers, the pedestrians. How do they feature in all this, and are they improving or complicating the transportation woes of Singapore? This time I'm going to start with Mr. Gulati.
So when you say private transport, the first thing that comes to my mind is the cost of owning a car in Singapore. Well, before I knew too much about it, I used to think that when it comes to owning a car in Singapore, you shouldn't even consider it. It's not an option for me. But then I went ahead and did some research, and I found out the total cost of owning a Mercedes S-Class in Singapore is about $201,000 Singapore dollars, including your COE, including the other taxes, and you have the car in your hand. And coming from India, I wanted to compare it to the price of owning the same car back home. And I was expecting it to be more of a difference than it turns out, because I found out that the cost of owning this car in India is about half the price of owning it in Singapore. And I was expecting the difference to be larger because it's just something that's embedded
Yeah,
in
in
my
all our
head,
minds,
you
it's
know?
a huge, we pay a lot
Yeah.
more for cars, right?
Yeah. So I realized that every government has its own way of controlling the transport on the roads, like controlling road congestion, and Singapore has opted to have in place the COE system, which I know the figure wise it looks really high, but it's a choice the government makes. And being a small city, I understand why it is so expensive to drive a car in Singapore.
Mhm.
So that's my take on it. I don't know what Singaporeans think.
Tony can't drive, he's failed about 5-6 times.
No, not true. I never even attempted it to begin with. No, but I guess the other point to note is also, I mean, beside cost and COE and all that, I guess one of the things about Singaporean as in general about Asian society, maybe particularly for developed nation like Singapore, getting a car is a social status. So the reason why I think people, in spite of the fact they have to pay so much monthly installment and all that, they still want to have a car. I guess beside convenient, I think a lot to do with the fact that it is about showing off.
Are you sure? I've got a beat up car and I don't think I can show that off.
Then you can't show off. But
No.
most of them will go and get some expensive car because they want to show off. And that is the reality as well, because that is one thing that probably adds on to the
The younger people
the
or
car.
the older people?
Well, I mean, I don't know whether younger or older, but I guess those who started work, even they can't afford, they do. And then I think I see it on the ground that a lot of people do that.
So we are responsible for adding to the congestion on the road.
I think we are part of the problem, to be honest. I mean, beside the fact that it's expensive, and the government have find many ways to try to rectify it, even with COE, but I don't really see the car going down, the number of cars going down.
Well, initially, they say scrap one car, buy one car.
Yeah.
But then I suppose an accountant said, hey, we can make some money, so let them pay and then let more cars on the road.
Not
I'm
quite.
sorry.
I
It
think the
started that way,
expectations of the
scrap.
young people also is that they want to own cars.
Yeah, but it started off, you have to buy an old car, scrap it, and then you can buy
new
one.
Oh.
That went out the window, I suppose. In some ways, we should really ask them.
But they had to meet the growing expectations of the
Yeah.
young people who wanted to own cars. So the
Yeah,
one
that's
for
fine.
one is okay if the population is stagnant. But if it isn't, you can't do that.
So they went on this auction thing.
Yeah, it didn't work.
Didn't work for whom?
I mean, the earlier
This
part
makes
of
a
the
lot of
scrapping
money.
and
Yeah,
all that
right,
kind of
scrap
things.
one,
The
yeah.
scrap one didn't work. That's why the COE
okay.
system.
Yeah.
Because like you say, I mean, they more young people wants to be able to afford or to have a car. You know, that's also, I guess also as you have family and all that, you know, that's one thing that is really for convenient as well. I mean, I'm
Okay,
not
quick
sure.
poll. Do you have a car?
No, I don't have a car.
Do you have a car?
Yes, I do.
How many?
One. That's all I can
Do you have a
afford.
car? Do you have a car?
Nope.
Okay. So then we're not representative.
No, I
you
used
have
to
a
have
car.
cars,
Yeah.
but I find that it's almost why should I pay so much more when I really don't have to go and show off. I would rather use that money, go overseas, buy a nice car and park it there for 3/4 of a year and
Or
come
buy a
and
house,
drive. Yeah, or buy a house. Yeah. Buy a house with a car in front.
Yeah, isn't it?
But that's
Flexible
what
choice.
they want here, right?
Yeah.
Like that's exactly what Singapore wants you to think.
You want to buy a
Why
house
do you
with a
want-
car in front.
but not here.
Not here.
You know.
We have cars that are weekend
Weekend
cars.
cars.
That's right.
Now, I think there are a lot of unhappy people with whenever they see a red label car, they get almost as annoyed as. No, I cannot be sexist. They get almost annoyed. Okay.
Yes, you were saying.
Yeah, go on.
Yes, you were saying.
But what do you feel about? Since you're not drivers, you really don't have any strong feelings about the red label cars, right?
I mean, I think that it's probably people who opt for that particular choice. It's really a financial consideration. I mean, the status thing. Okay, maybe I can understand a proportion of it, but I do think that for quite a lot, people are willing to spend that money, especially when they have kids and they're looking after their elderly parents.
Right.
You know, they in a way it's. Well, we can consider it a luxury, but honestly speaking, if you're trying to ferry your family around, you do need a car in that respect. So, yes, our government chose this system, but I guess one thing I wanted to kind of toss into the equation was, it is a measure, but is there possibly another way where precisely that demographic I'm talking about, you know, a family that's trying to look after elderly, you know, parents and also children, they need the car to get around, you know, and the way that it's going, the higher the COE goes, it's really just a particular percentage of the social strata who are going to be able to afford cars, not just one, two. But what about those families that can't even afford one?
So it does
Yeah.
penalize those.
It
who cannot
does
afford it, right?
penalize.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, that's just.
Perhaps they
That's a
should
good
have a
point.
point system. So many babies, how many points, so many elderly, so many points. Then when you reach a certain point, you pay a discount to that way you can equalize in a way. But there are many ways that they should get the opinion of people and a forum. But you see, our system is we know best. We hired the best, so they all think it through, and here's it, given to you.
But the people that make the decision don't even take the taxi or take the public transport.
You have a point.
So
there.
that's
exactly
another
what
problem.
I'm saying. Yeah.
Probably, you know, it's from the ivory tower again. Yeah.
Mm. I also think that some of the solutions are enmeshed with the development of the public transport system. When that improves, then it is easier to transition more to public transport. But for some families, it is very difficult, especially when they are not disabled friendly, and things like that, you see. So it's a transition, a problem of transition. I'd like to bring this discussion to a close, and perhaps on a slightly surprise note, because I just learned that Sharon here is a rock singer, and we'd like to end with one of her songs. Good night.
There's a fire starting